Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Run, Walk, Talk, Tales of Inclusion and Development. My name's Steph, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm here with Judy, and her pronouns are she and her. Uh, and today we have a very exciting guest, Tami Wong, who is the founder of Hair Loss Pride. Big welcome, Tami. Judy, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can share a bit more about Tami.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tammy has lived with alopecia since she was 15. She has a BA in psychology and she spent 2 decades in healthcare, first in physical therapy and later in biotech operations and patient advocacy. And then in September of 2024, she founded Hair Loss Pride, a business dedicated to empowering women and teens with hair loss. And she shares her journey and expertise on social media as at Hair Loss Pride. And Tammy will include that as well when we post the podcast. We'll include that for our listeners, and we can also include a link to your website as well. And very interestingly, Tammy, you are a best-selling author. You have also written a children's book, Hair Pride. So as Steph said, welcome. And Steph, I'm going to hand it over to you, and let's dive right in.
Perfect. All right. Tammy, can you share and tell us sort of your experience with alopecia and how did it lead you to sort of establish Hair Loss Pride? How did you get to this point?
Sure. Yes. So growing up, as a kid and as a teenager, early teenager, I had very thick hair. The women in my hair, the women in my family have very thick hair,
Yeah.
and I didn't really ever think about losing my hair at that point. I had hair as a child down to my butt. It was super thick, super straight. But when I was 15, I took an acne medication. I had very bad cystic acne. And, we went to the dermatologist and they prescribed me this medication and it triggered my hair loss to start at the age of 15. So, because it was so thick to begin with, I didn't notice right away. I was on this
Hmm.
medication for
Hmm.
5 months, and I would say
Hmm.
it probably took me 2 months to start noticing something had changed.
Right.
And, the texture of my hair was originally very thick and coarse, and then kind of very gradually it changed to thin and fragile and fine and started breaking off and it became very dry and brittle. And in less than a year, I noticed that my part had started to widen. So, it had thinned at the crown here, and where I didn't used to see anything, this part just became very wide. And I was, 15, 16 years old. I didn't understand what was happening. And I never had experiences of clumps of hair falling out like a lot of women with alopecia will experience.
Mm.
So for me, I just didn't make the connection. And alopecia there was a lot less known about it at that time too. I'm 43 now. So, over the years, my hair just continually thinned diffusely throughout my scalp. There was not one spot, it was just all over. And I didn't really have anyone to talk to about it. Like I said, everyone in my family had thick hair. I grew up in a small town in Nebraska. No one my age was losing their hair as a teenager. And, I was very embarrassed about it. I cut my hair really short when I was in high school and college. I highlighted it, tried to make it look a little bit thicker. And yeah, I tried using Rogaine and things like that. And it wasn't until I was 23 that I actually went to the doctor and did a scalp biopsy. And
Mhm.
that is when I got the diagnosis of androgenic alopecia,
Mhm.
which is also known as female pattern hair loss.
Mm.
So, I'll never forget that day, getting the diagnosis from my doctor, which for them is just another diagnosis. It wasn't
Mhm.
wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily given with care.
Mhm.
And I, went out to the parking lot and just sat in my car and just bawled. I was just devastated because I knew my life would never be the same after
Yeah.
that. And I just
Yeah.
didn't know if I was going to lose all of my hair, if I was going to go completely bald.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just was so ashamed of it in my
Mhm.
20s, and I hid it from, the things I said, like keeping my hair short, to using hair fibers, like that you would shake on that would camouflage the thinning spots, to wearing a really bad wig in my early 20s and
Mhm.
or wearing my hair up all the time.
Mhm.
And I really, when I think back, I lost like 17 years of my life due to insecurity and shame around my hair loss because I didn't have a community to go to for support. And I isolated myself. and I stopped doing things I loved, like swimming. I didn't feel comfortable, showering at the gym, things like that, because I didn't want anyone to see my hair wet. I didn't even let my husband see my hair wet until last year. And we've
Oh,
been
wow.
married for 13 years and together for 15 years. So, and he's obviously known
Wow.
about it for a long time, but
Mhm.
it's been a very hard thing to show other people. So, while I started losing my hair at age 15, I didn't talk about it openly until I was 32. And, I spent the last 10 plus years really grieving that loss appropriately because I never did back then. And, um, sharing it and being able to heal because I was finally able to talk about it and let it out so it didn't have power over me anymore.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and I think that, and it was just last year, that I started sharing openly on social media about my hair loss, which I never thought I would do. Like,
Yeah.
never in a million years could you have told me I would take my wig off or show my thinning hair on videos for whoever to see.
Yeah.
Um, but strangely, that has been incredibly liberating because it's helped me to connect with so many other women who have hair loss, whether they're public about it or not, and, build friendships, build community, and feel less alone. So, my goal is to help as many women as possible so that they can stop that shame spiral and they don't lose this precious life, time in their lives like I did.
Mhm.
And so that's why I started Hair Loss Pride. I before this was actually managing a wig store in Vancouver for close to a year. And through my time there, every woman that would come in, we had the same themes: isolation, shame, embarrassment, feeling alone. And I just didn't I couldn't find many groups out there where you could really come together and talk about it. There are some foundations out there. There's obviously the Canadian Alopecia Areata Foundation. There's the National Alopecia Areata Foundation out of the States, but they're specific to alopecia areata, which is not my type of alopecia. And it made me feel like I wasn't included and I couldn't join that group,
Yeah.
which is such a strange thing when you're dealing with something like alopecia that you feel like you don't have enough hair loss to join an
Yeah.
alopecia group.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Yeah. Wow.
I, that's why I was like, okay, I'm just going to make my own thing. I'm going to build the community that I wish I had had. And
Mhm.
I don't care how much hair loss you have. I don't care if it's temporary or permanent. You can join it and you can
Right.
find support. So yeah, that's what led me to doing this.
Well, thanks for sharing that. And there's so much in what you've shared, and it's so brave for you to share your story. And thinking about at 15, I can just we can empathize with how difficult it is as a 15-year-old to experience that. And then, as you said, to not feel that you could really share it with anybody until it sounds like, very, very recently. And I think that in everything that you've described, you've really spoken about how important our hair is for many of us to our self-identity. And so maybe you can speak a little bit more to how does it affect self-identity, and what strategies did you use to come to this place where you're like, I'm going to build a community. I don't care anymore. I'm going to just be myself out there. Like, how did you achieve this? How did you get to where you are now?
Yeah. I think in terms of our hair and our self-identity, it isn't just hair. For women, our hair is definitely a part of our identity. It's part of our body. It's part of our femininity. It's how we present ourselves to the world. It's one of the first things that people see when they look at us, our face and our hair. And so loss of your hair as a female can be very traumatic, especially when it's very quick, like with chemo or people who lose their hair very suddenly. It's a huge loss in how you see yourself in the mirror and just how you're confident and how it affects your confidence. With society and the messages they give us as women, through movies, commercials, magazines, hair ads, you know, all of those messages are we should be skinny, we should be beautiful, we should have long, thick hair. And when we don't measure up to those impossible standards, it's people can be really cruel to women, especially on social media. There are great things about social media in finding community, and there are really horrible things in a lot of internet trolls and a lot of keyboard warriors who will say awful things to women with hair loss. It just amazes me. So, while I'm glad, I think alopecia is getting a lot more notice now, especially with Jada Pinkett Smith coming out a few years ago about her own hair loss. I really credit her with talking about it. It's still, there's not enough awareness about it and how many women it really does affect. People still think it's rare, and it is not. My type of hair loss, androgenic alopecia, affects 30 million women in the US alone.
Oh, wow.
Alopecia areata, I think it's 160 million people globally. So it is not an uncommon thing. But because we hide it, people think it's uncommon. Because we don't talk about it, people think it's uncommon. And, there's this stigma and this stereotype that if a woman's losing her hair, she must be sick. She must have cancer. There must be something wrong with her. And that's so completely untrue. Most women with alopecia are very healthy, have nothing wrong with them. It can be a number of factors, and some they're still investigating of why it happens. It can be genetic. It can be because of hormonal changes, like going on and off the birth control pill,
Right.
childbirth, menopause,
Hmm.
medications like me, autoimmune diseases like lupus and thyroid issues, even extreme stress can cause hair loss temporarily or chronically. So, it's just, there's not enough awareness of that. And I think that's why it remains stigmatized. And that's something I hope to change. So one of the ways that I got to a better place was I talked to someone about it. So whether it's, a therapist, a family friend, a spouse, if you don't have someone like me, get it out there, talk to somebody, find someone that you trust, because the more that you hold it in, the more power it will have over you. And, I kept it inside like a shameful secret, and it made me think I was ugly and unlovable for 20 years. When I was 22, a boy broke up with me because I had told him I had hair loss, and the next day he broke up with me. So for 6 years after that, I carried this thought in my head: I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to have kids. No one's ever going to marry or want to, love some woman who's losing her hair. And then I met my husband and found out very quickly that was not the case at all. But, I held this assumption in my brain for so long because I didn't talk to people about it. And once I did, I realized, oh, people don't love me because of my hair. And if the value they have placed on me is because of my hair, then they're not worth my time, and they're too superficial for my
Mhm.
life anyway. And
That's
dodge
right.
the bullet. Better to find out now.
Yeah.
So, I actually went to grief therapy for a number of reasons, but I went 2 years ago, and I ended up addressing my alopecia during that time, and really found it immensely helpful because I hadn't grieved it properly, and I was able to finally grieve a loss of part of myself. So therapy, talking to someone is one. I also highly recommend, if you're a woman with hair loss, going on social media. Search alopecia, search female hair loss. You will find so many accounts of women who are sharing their stories who have hair loss there. And immediately you feel less alone. You're like, oh my God, look at all of these people. It's so powerful to normalize this, community, and to know that there are so many others besides you that are going through this. I've also found the alopecia community to be very supportive, and I've made friends through it, even though we haven't met in person. We
Mhm.
message each other often, and we, support each other when we're having bad days. And it really helps to have somebody to talk to who gets it, and you don't have to explain what it feels like,
Mhm.
to go through this. And then lastly, I think you have to find the solution that works for you. So for me, I decided on wigs after 10 years of using hair fibers, which I use, there's several on the market, but I use Topic hair fibers. And that for me worked for a long time when I was still doing my hair and trying to maintain my normal hair. But it got to the point that it just wasn't worth it for me, and it actually wasn't making me feel confident anymore. So I decided at that point to go to wigs and to explore that side. And so there are some people who are going to want to explore wigs and toppers. There are some people who want to use fibers. There are some people who will feel best cutting their hair off or buzzing it off and going bald. There's some people that want to wear scarves. So, I mean, no one can tell you what's going to make you feel the most confident. You have to really play around and decide what feels the most like you and what's going to make you comfortable and confident. And don't be afraid to reach out to people for support and ask for advice if you're not sure where to start.
Tammy, thank you so much for sharing those things. And I think that, I do love that last piece of advice around the find what works for you. Because everyone is different. And that speaking out and talking about it, that sort of that common theme of a variety of things where it's like you don't talk to somebody. It's very, there's a lot of shame and guilt and all the things. So big fans of therapy, do our inner work, do our inner work.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Hair Loss Pride. And now I think it's been around for over a year now. Is that right? Or so? How long has it been?
September of 2020.
Wonderful.
So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
still pretty new, but feels like, I mean, I started the social media account before I started the actual
Yeah.
company. So I've been around doing that for a little over a year. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. That's good. So what are sort of some of the goals for Hair Loss Pride? What do you sort of how are you going to further sort of support the community?
Yeah. So because it is still new, I kind of feel like I'm just getting started. There are so many
Hmm.
ways that I feel like I can be helpful, and I want to do everything at once, but I'm one person, and so it's
Yes.
bit by bit. So I've kind of focused on four or so things to start out with. So the things that have really taken off so far actually are one-on-one coaching and salon workshops. So with the one-on-one coaching, it makes sense because we're private about it as women with hair loss. It's a shameful topic. A lot of people aren't going to feel comfortable right away going into a big group of people saying, "Hey, I have hair loss. Let's talk about it." So I've definitely had more people reach out and just they'll want to talk about a certain issue. Maybe they don't know, like one of my clients had purchased a bunch of toppers, but she wasn't wearing any of them because she didn't feel comfortable. So when we talked about it, it really came down to more of the mental and emotional aspects of it. And just being able to talk about her hair loss with somebody who got it and me giving her some advice on how can you customize these to make it look more like you. Take it to a hairstylist, have them do these things so that you can actually wear them. So things like that. It could be, they could talk to me about anything, dating and hair loss. There's so many ways to go. So that has been something that I've found good response to. And then for me, I have a mission to educate salons and stylists because I personally didn't go to a salon for many years because I didn't want anyone to see my hair wet. And I had gone to a salon and felt like everyone was staring at me. And I felt very insecure and it didn't feel like a safe space. So I didn't go to a salon for a long time. And I really missed going to a salon. There's that self-care piece. It's
Mhm.
nice to go get a good scalp massage.
Yeah.
It's something fun to do. And I have talked to so many women with hair loss who also avoid going to a salon. So I've been shocked to find out that stylists don't learn about alopecia and how to support clients with hair loss in school at all.
Really?
So it's a really big gap in their training, I feel like,
Hmm.
because up to 50% of women will have noticeable hair loss by the age of 50. And so it's a huge part of their clientele. So I have now presented to three salons in Vancouver and gotten really good feedback from the stylists there. My hope is to take it to hair schools and to educate people when they're still students so
Mm.
that they go out into the workforce, starting out as a stylist, already having this education. So that's a big one. And then I also host a monthly meetup virtual group where women can come together with hair loss and, meet each other, share experiences, ask questions. I provide education, as an educational topic of some kind. And I also try to bring in a woman with alopecia who can talk about how she's used her experience and turned it into something positive. Because again, I've met so many women through this community that I think have wonderful hope to give to other women who are in the beginning stages of this.
Yeah.
And two more things. So,
Yeah.
because I've worn wigs for over 10 years and I managed a wig store in Vancouver, I also offer wig consultations because buying a wig can be really overwhelming. There are so many factors and, human hair, synthetic, what kind of type of cap you want, what type of hair you want. It's really hard to know all of these things. What brands are good brands? What's the quality of the hair? So, I aim to help people make that less scary. And I have developed personal relationships with a number of small wig brands in Canada and the US. So now I feel comfortable recommending brands to people. And I basically, take their measurements of their head, talk about their price point, the things that they want, and I go out and research it for them and come back with options so that they don't have to do hours of research to find something and still not know if it's a good brand. And then this summer, I'm going to start integrating breath work into my practice with clients. And I don't know how familiar you are with breath work, but I've done it personally and I have found that it's really helped me release grief and trauma and anxiety that I've held in my body. And especially with this topic and how women with hair loss really hold a lot of this in. I find that a mental and emotional toll of alopecia can sometimes and oftentimes be more difficult than the physical side. So I look forward to bringing that piece in to address more just beyond the physical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And someday, I hope to speak at conferences and, the actual physical retreats for women with hair loss to come together. So that's for the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, what a difference, right? Where you felt for many years you were kind of in a hiding and you felt this shame, and then now with this sense of community and this community that you've built, like what a difference, right? With all of the things that you're doing and all of the impact that you're having. And I think that leads nicely into our next question, which is you have built this really strong community. And certainly you've described the role that community has played in your journey. And so, just seeing your clientele, what have you noticed most for them when you've given them this safe space that has really helped them both personally and professionally?
Yeah, I think, everyone wants to feel like they belong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And community is especially important when you have something that makes you feel different.
Mm-hmm.
And, as common as it is, female hair loss is still very stigmatized. And, as a result, as I've said, women don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
So while there are these alopecia and wig influencers on social media that I think are incredibly important to help normalize wig wearing, again, it needs to go beyond that. And because I know I've been able to personally heal and grow so much by sharing my story and talking about it with others, I know that's made the biggest difference more than anything, that community piece. And now I get messages from women who I don't know on social media who tell me, like, thank you for normalizing this. I've gone through this too. And many who've had hair loss because of an acne medication as well, who have reached out to me. And, they thank me for raising awareness. And so knowing that I've helped even one woman, honestly, for me is worth it, because I know if I had been that woman on the other side, it would have changed my life. So I think as women, we're natural caregivers. We often put ourselves last.
Yes.
And so we don't address our emotional needs and physical needs a lot of the time. And, when we as women can feel safe and confident and whole, I feel like we are going to show up so much brighter for ourselves and everyone else in our lives, both professionally and personally. And, I always think about this one client when I worked at the wig store who had flown in actually from Alberta, and she was 45 years old and she had lost all of her hair within a 3-week time span because of a severe stressor in her life. They weren't sure, she was still trying to figure out why it had happened. And, she walked into the salon nervous, looking distraught, obviously not knowing what to expect. She'd never tried a wig on in her life. And, shedding tears about how difficult this time had been for her. And I was able to find a wig that looked exactly like her natural hair. And when she tried it on, like the moment she put it on, like her entire face shifted. She cried happy tears. She was overwhelmed with emotion because she was like, I look like me again. And I saw this all the time at the wig store, just how different women looked coming in versus going out after finding a wig and how life-changing that can be. She was smiling, she was happy, she gave me a huge hug, she told me I changed her life. Um, and people minimize wigs and say, oh, like that's silly. No, it can change someone's life who's going through a traumatic loss like this. And so I really think of her often because that's exactly why, I'm doing this, because just seeing the change in one person, it really makes it worth it.
Tami, we're getting near the end, and I've got like one more question, but I feel like we could talk for hours because there's like so many questions I have. So I'll ask you the sort of the one question we typically ask all of our guests
Yes.
is what book or podcast are you reading or listening to, and why?
I've got two of each. So for a
Beautiful.
book, I'm listening to I'm reading The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins.
Yes.
So I feel like a lot of people are probably reading this.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
A friend actually gifted it to me because they know I listen to her podcast.
Okay.
And I listened to her podcast about the Let Them Theory, months ago before she published this. And I think it's so important, especially as women, we really care so much about what other people think. We take care of other people and we put ourselves last, again, kind of like I said in the last question. And, it's so powerful to be able to be like, you know what? Some people aren't going to like me. Some people aren't going to agree with what I'm doing. Some people are going to think I'm silly for posting social media photos or, videos.
Yeah.
Let them. Because, I need to let me do what I feel like is empowering to myself and others. So I just think it's a really important book and a reminder to really follow what feels true to yourself and try not to worry about what other people are doing and thinking. The other book I'm reading is actually by a local Vancouver author called Jasmine Seeley, and it's called The Island of Forgetting. So I think she was nominated for an award for this a couple of years ago, but it's about a family growing up in Barbados who runs this beachfront hotel and kind of how the lies and trauma that have happened throughout the years impact different members of the family. So it's super interesting. And then podcasts, I listen to Mel Robbins. I really like that she's geared towards women and she brings in so many different experts and really covers the emotional, mental, and physical sides of being a woman and what really matters and how we can focus on ourselves more and make our lives more meaningful. And then I listen to Smartless because they're hilarious. So Jason Bateman.
Yes.
Yeah. So those three guys just crack me up and
They're
together
so
they're
good.
so funny. And I also just love the guests that they bring on. So anytime I'm in a bad mood or like need a laugh, I put them on.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's great because we got a nonfiction, a fiction book, and then Mel Robbins, and then an entertainment podcast. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for sharing your story. I mean, it's so interesting to hear about everything that you've gone through, and now to the place where you're at, building this amazing community. And I know that your community is for teens and women. So to think of you're probably serving people with this community that you've built who would have been you many years ago, that 15-year-old. Now somebody has a place that they can turn to in going through this. And also that reminder that sharing our stories is so powerful, sharing our stories generally with people. And it's just so nice to connect with people who are going through something similar. There's nothing like that, and realizing you're not alone. So what a wonderful community that you have built. So thank you for sharing that with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Until next time.